In a quiet London courtroom in 2020, as Elton John stood as a national icon, one forgotten name returned: Renate Blauel. She filed a claim, arguing that his memoir and film revived a past bound by silence after their divorce. Why would a woman who vanished for over 30 years speak now? To understand, we must return to the beginning. He was not Elton John yet. He was still Reginald Dwight, a quiet boy in a house where doors closed harder than they should, and voices rose faster than love could. In suburban Pinner, childhood did not sound like music. It sounded like tension, thin, sharp, always ready to snap. His father, Stanley, lived by order and uniform. A Royal Air Force officer with perfect creases on his sleeves and almost none in his smile. He believed in discipline, not dreams. Structure, not songs. A son, in his eyes, should be steady, predictable, respectable. Not a boy who could play Mozart by ear at 4 years old. Reginald learned early that applause would not come from his father. Approval was rare. Affection was rarer. Every small attempt to share music was met with quiet dismissal. And so the boy retreated inward, building a private world where melodies could breathe, even when he could not. His mother, Sheila, was different. She was fiery, emotional, impulsive. She argued often with Stanley, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but always intensely. Their house held a heat that never warmed him. Yet she, along with his grandmother Ivy, offered the one thing he needed most: permission to feel. Permission to sit at a piano and let emotion spill through the keys when it could not exist safely anywhere else. It was Ivy who bought him his first piano. It stood in the corner like a doorway to another life. When the house filled with tension, Reginald sat at that piano and created a world where sound softened everything it touched. Music became his escape, his refuge, his language. At 11, he won a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music. A quiet boy suddenly placed in rooms filled with talent and tradition. His teachers saw a gift he did not fully understand yet, an instinctive connection to music that came not from training, but from survival. When the world outside felt unstable, the piano became the only constant. By 15, he played in pubs for extra money. Smoke-filled rooms, clinking glasses, strangers' conversations, yet none of it distracted him. The piano was the only thing that made sense. He played to earn. He played to forget. He played because it was the only place where he belonged. Then came Fred Durf, Fairbrother, his stepfather. A kind man. A listening man. Not a uniform. Not an echo of disappointment. He supported Reginald's music. He encouraged it. He showed him what gentleness sounded like. But he arrived late, and the damage was already part of the boy's foundation. Growing up in a house where emotions were either suppressed or explosive shaped him into someone who needed affection the way others needed air. He craved connection. He chased validation. He wanted love so deeply that he often reached for it in the wrong places, with the wrong people, at the wrong time. And as the music grew louder, so did the emptiness he carried. Success did not quiet it. In fact, success magnified it. The more audiences cheered, the more he feared the silence afterward. The brighter the spotlight shone, the darker the shadows behind it became. Every triumph fed the same hunger, the need to feel accepted, understood, held. But applause is fleeting, and Reginald, soon to become Elton, did not yet know how to fill the spaces it left behind. This emotional vacuum would shape his early relationships. It would pull him toward people who couldn't stay, and push away those who tried to love him too gently. It would lead him into patterns of excess, distraction, and escape. It would teach him to confuse intensity with love, attention with safety, fantasy with partnership. And years later, it would lead him into a marriage he desperately wanted to believe in, one that promised stability, normalcy, and a version of peace he had never known. A marriage that began with hope, but carried the weight of everything he had never resolved. Reginald Dwight became Elton John, but the boy inside him, the one sitting at the piano trying to drown out tension, never disappeared. And that boy would shape not only the music the world adored, but the choices, mistakes, and heartbreaks that followed. Because sometimes, the story of a legend begins with something far simpler. A child trying to feel loved in a house where love had no place to settle. Before she became the silent chapter in someone else's legend, she was simply a girl in Berlin. A girl born into comfort, surrounded by books, culture, and the quiet certainty of privilege. Her father ran a successful publishing house. Her childhood was orderly, structured, predictable. But even in a house filled with words, Renate Blauel preferred sound. Not the loud kind. Not applause. Not crowds. She was drawn to the quiet mechanics behind sound. The dials, the tape reels, the small adjustments that changed everything but never asked for attention. While other children dreamed of being seen, Renate dreamed of shaping what others heard. That difference would define her entire life. She grew up disciplined, methodical, careful, a mirror opposite of Elton's storm-filled childhood. Where he survived through emotion, she survived through precision. Where he sought escape in noise, she sought purpose in silence. Yet she didn't follow the path laid out for her. She could have stepped into the family business. She could have lived a comfortable life without risk. But she chose something unpredictable. She became a flight attendant for Lufthansa, a job that let her leave the expected, drift through airports, and watch the world pass from a distance. It fit her personality, present, useful, but never the center of attention. Yet even at 30,000 feet, she felt the pull of something deeper. She didn't want to carry passengers. She wanted to carry sound. So she quit, left stability behind, and enrolled in an audio engineering program, a field dominated almost entirely by men. It was not glamorous. It required long hours, technical focus, and the kind of patience that few people possessed. But Renate did. She didn't enter the studio to be heard. She entered it to listen. In a world where volume equaled power, Renate found strength in being the quietest person in the room. She fought her battles silently, not with confrontation, not with demands, but with skill. And people noticed. By the late 1970s, she was one of the few female engineers trusted in top London studios. She worked on major albums, Mike Oldfield's Platinum, The Human League's Hysteria, Duran Duran's Rio. She assisted sessions with Marvin Gaye and Pete Townsend. Big artists, big pressure. Yet Renate remained the still point in rooms filled with egos, deadlines, and chaos. While others pushed to be seen, she pushed dials, adjusted levels, balanced tracks. She cared only about the sound. The spotlight belonged to others. The control room belonged to her. She had something rare. A presence that could calm a room without saying a word. A kind of quiet authority that didn't need a title. A dignity that didn't need attention to be real. And because she never chased fame, fame never chased her. Her workspace became her world. A narrow booth lit by red buttons and blinking meters. The faint hum of wires. The warm weight of headphones. The subtle satisfaction of a perfect mix no one would ever know she made. She didn't mind. Creation was enough. But there was a cost to choosing the shadows. When you spend your life behind the curtain, people forget to look for you. When you become the background, people stop asking if you belong in the story. That quiet strength, so essential in a studio, became a weakness in the public eye. She was not built for headlines. Not built to defend herself against speculation. Not built to explain her motives to strangers. She had crafted a life of stillness, and the world around Elton John had no stillness to offer. Fame is loud. Marriage to fame is louder. And yet, the irony remains. It was precisely her quietness that drew Elton to her in the first place. Her steadiness. Her discipline. Her refusal to treat him like a spectacle. He was a storm. She was structure. He was chaos in sequence. She was order in headphones. Two worlds that should never have collided, and yet did, with the force of two opposite frequencies meeting in a single studio. But long before their wedding, long before the questions and the headlines, Renate's story had already chosen its shape. She was never meant to stand at the center of the frame. She never wanted to. She found purpose behind the glass, in a world where silence had meaning. Which is why, decades later, when the spotlight found her again, when her name resurfaced in headlines she never wanted, she had no practice defending herself. She had no public voice. She had only the instinct she always lived by. Step back. Stay quiet. Let the noise pass. Her mistake was assuming the noise would never return. Because the truth is simple and quietly tragic. When you spend your life in the shadows, it becomes far too easy for others to erase you from the story. He met her at a moment when life felt too loud for him to bear. Air Studios, early 1983. The lights were low. The days were long. The music, his music, was slipping through his fingers. Elton John walked in exhausted. Fame had stopped feeling like a crown and started feeling like a weight. The tours, the late nights, the substances, the loneliness, they blurred together into a single, overwhelming noise. A noise he could no longer control. And then, in a room full of tangled cables and frayed tempers, there was a quiet presence. Renate Blauel. Head down. Focus sharp. Hands steady on the console. She didn't stare at him. She didn't gush over him. She didn't treat him like a legend. She treated him like a person who needed a place to land. Where others fed the chaos around him, she steadied it. Where others demanded attention, she offered silence. Where others saw a star, she saw a man trying to find his balance again. Elton wasn't used to that kind of calm. He had built his life on spectacle. She had built hers on structure. Two opposite worlds placed in the same studio. At first, they barely spoke. Then came small conversations. Then shared jokes during long recording nights. Then hours spent traveling between cities, adjusting sound levels, waiting backstage. She saw him in every version of himself. On stage with 1,000 lights behind him, and backstage with all the lights inside him flickering. He saw in her a rare kind of peace. One that made him feel steady for the first time in years. By the time the world tour began, they had fallen into a rhythm. Not romance yet, but recognition. A sense of belonging neither of them expected. And somewhere between London and Los Angeles, between the crowded arenas and the silent hotel rooms, Elton began to wonder if she was the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. What if stability was something you could marry? The proposal, a quiet room in Sydney. February 10th, 1984. Sydney. A small Indian restaurant. Soft lights. Curry steam rising. The outside world completely unaware of what was about to happen. Elton had been restless all day. Nervous. Lost. Searching for something to anchor himself. And then, between courses, he simply asked, would she marry him? No rehearsed speech. No planned moment. Just a question that felt urgent, almost fragile. Renate froze. She hadn't expected it. No one had. But she saw the sincerity in his eyes. A man holding on to the first steady thing he had touched in years. She said yes. Not because it was a dream she had carried, but because she believed in him. And because she believed he needed something real. The next morning, Elton announced their engagement to the press. 3 days later, on Valentine's Day, they were married. The wedding, a fairy tale written in flashbulbs. February 14th, 1984. St. Mark's Church, Darling Point, Sydney. The sun bright. The air warm. Cameras everywhere. Elton arrived in a white tailcoat, a lilac silk shirt, a purple bow tie, and a straw boater hat. It was theatrical, bold, unmistakably him. The world expected flash, and he delivered. Renate wore a white lace-trimmed gown. Simple. Elegant. A gold heart pendant set with 63 diamonds rested on her chest. Bright but modest, exactly her. The contrast was cinematic. He glowed outwardly. She glowed inwardly. Together, they looked like a fairy tale couple stepping out of a storybook. But beneath the smiles, neither fully understood the magnitude of the promises they were making. The press exploded. A global pop icon marrying a woman. This was the story of the year. Fans cheered. Critics speculated. Headlines multiplied. Some called it a miracle. Some called it a cover. Some questioned whether it was a shield against rumors about his private life. The noise around them grew louder than the vows themselves. The tabloids created myths. 2 bedrooms. A wife too busy mixing albums to play the role. A marriage built on headlines, not heart. But inside the church that Valentine's morning, Renate believed every word she said. She believed she could build a quiet life with him. She believed she could be the grounding force he needed. She believed love didn't need to be loud to be real. And Elton, tired, hopeful, longing for something ordinary, believed that having a wife might help him return to the version of himself he kept chasing. For a moment, on those church steps, it felt possible. He was smiling. She was radiant. The world applauded as if they were witnessing the start of a perfect story. But fairy tales depend on magic. And magic is hard to hold when real life begins again. Because the truth sat quietly between them. Renate walked into that marriage with faith. Elton walked into it with hope. And hope, unlike faith, always trembles. In the end, their wedding was not the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of 2 people trying desperately to rewrite their own destinies. They married under the Sydney sun. But when the lights faded and the applause settled, reality arrived quietly, like a shift in temperature you only notice when it's too late. Renate left her modest flat in Kilburn with its creaking steps and narrow windows. She entered Woodside, Elton John's sprawling estate in Windsor, a place of chandeliers, manicured gardens, and rooms big enough to swallow silence. It was a single step across a threshold, but it felt like crossing worlds. She had been earning £34 a week as a sound engineer. Now she was the spouse of a global icon, a transformation that dazzled everyone but her. Renate hadn't married fame. She had married a man she believed needed steadiness. But fame came bundled with him, loud, intrusive, impossible to negotiate with. And she was not built for that world. The woman who didn't want spotlight. Paparazzi waited at the gates. Reporters called her house. Flashbulbs followed their car wherever it went. Renate moved through this new life like someone learning to breathe underwater. Slow, careful, unsure if she could survive the pressure. She preferred soundproof rooms to crowded parties. She preferred mixing desks to microphones pointed at her face. She preferred invisibility to spectacle. But being Mrs. Elton John meant the opposite of invisibility. Elton tried to shield her. He promised he would. But he was rarely home long enough to keep those promises. Tours, promotions, albums, events, airports, hotels. Repeat. He lived in motion. She lived in stillness. They became two perfectly drawn lines, running side by side, but never touching. Elton's inner war. Behind the sequins and the jokes, Elton was battling himself. Years later, he would admit what he could not admit then, that he already knew he was gay. He wasn't hiding it from the world as much as he was hiding it from himself. He hoped marriage would fix what felt broken inside him. It'll settle me, he thought. It'll make me normal. It'll cure the loneliness. But loneliness doesn't vanish when the cause is internal. And marriage cannot heal what honesty never touches. The substances made it worse. Vodka at noon. Lines of distraction at dawn. Nights he couldn't remember. Arguments he regretted before they even ended. His life spun fast. His emotions spun faster. And Renate was left trying to hold still in a world that never stopped shaking. Renate's quiet struggle. She read the headlines. She heard the rumors. Some said she was a prop. Some said she was a shield. Some said she was too busy working to be a real wife. And every rumor carved a small question into her. Am I enough? She didn't confront Elton. That wasn't her way. She held her hurt inward, polished it, quieted it, tucked it away. But silence can be heavy. Heavier than noise. Heavier than truth. While Elton searched for answers in stadiums and studios, Renate searched for hers in empty rooms at Woodside, wondering where she belonged in a marriage that seemed to slip through her hands like smoke. Her loyalty was strong. Her love was gentle. But no one can reach a person who is locked in a battle within himself. The milestones that marked the end. The first sign came quietly. Elton's 40th birthday, a lavish, glittering celebration filled with famous faces, champagne, and noise. Renate wasn't there. People noticed. Whispers grew. But the couple said nothing. Public appearances grew rare. Cameras captured fewer photos. Eventually, the world began to sense what they would later confirm. The marriage was breaking in silence. March 1988, one final appearance together. A celebration believed to be hers. A smile that felt practiced. A presence that felt temporary. And then November came. The papers filed. The signatures printed. The story ended. For years of marriage dissolved with a single statement. They were parting amicably. No drama. No accusations. No interviews. A quiet ending to a marriage that had been quiet from the start. Aftermath. 2 ways of disappearing. Elton said little publicly. But privately, he carried guilt. Not guilt for leaving her. Guilt for not being honest sooner. Guilt for offering a promise he was never built to keep. Guilt for dragging someone gentle into a storm he couldn't control. Renate, meanwhile, did what she always did. She withdrew. She protected her silence. She placed the broken pieces of her life where no one could see them. She didn't write a book. She didn't give interviews. She didn't claim anything. She simply vanished from the frame. Because some people respond to heartbreak by shouting. Renate responded by stepping back. Not out of weakness, but out of instinct. She had always been a quiet woman. And quiet women heal differently. They choose solitude over spectacle. Stillness over noise. But in that stillness, a truth remained. Their marriage had been 2 lives moving beside each other, hoping to meet in the middle, yet never learning how. And that is the quiet tragedy of their story. A man fighting himself, a woman trying to love him through it. Two hearts reaching, but never touching long enough to stay. They walked away from each other quietly. No dramatic farewell. No final scene. Just two doors closing in different parts of the world. And the silence between them stretched for more than 30 years. But silence is not the same as peace. Sometimes it is only a pause before the past finds its way back. The Elton branch. Rebirth through truth. After the divorce, Elton stopped running. Stopped hiding. Stopped pretending the storm inside him was normal. In 1990, he checked into rehab. No sequence. No spotlight. Just a man confronting the life he had built on avoidance. He quit drinking. He quit drugs. He learned how to sit with himself without reaching for a distraction. In the stillness that followed, something remarkable happened. He rebuilt. 1992, the one marked his return. 1997, Candle in the Wind became one of the best-selling singles of all time. 1992 onward, he founded the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which would eventually raise hundreds of millions for HIV programs. 1998, he knelt before Queen Elizabeth II as she honored him with a knighthood. And publicly, after years of confusion and denial, he finally told the truth. He was gay, fully and openly. A truth that freed him from the weight he once tried to outrun. Through honesty came connection. Through connection came family. In 1993, he met filmmaker David Furnish. They built something slow, steady, and grounded, the opposite of his old life. In 2014, they married. Later, they welcomed two sons, Zachary and Elijah, born via surrogate. For the first time, Elton lived a version of domestic peace he once believed impossible. Birthday parties, school mornings, quiet weekends, a home not filled with tension but with laughter. He had reinvented himself, not just as an artist, but as a man finally living in alignment with his truth. The Renate branch, a life made of quiet. While Elton re-entered the spotlight with clarity, Renate slipped further into the shadows. After the divorce, she moved into a country house Elton had bought her, a gesture of kindness, not obligation. There, she changed her name, changed her appearance, changed her life. Neighbors didn't know her past. Some didn't even know her real name. She became a ghost by choice. She left the music industry entirely. The soundboards, the studios, the long nights spent stitching songs together. All of it vanished when the marriage did. In the early 2000s, she returned to Germany to care for her aging parents. A quiet village, a quiet routine, a quiet existence. But quiet does not erase memory. And some memories are heavier than others. Court documents later revealed she spent years undergoing treatment for depression, therapy, isolation, even ECT. She didn't blame Elton. She didn't speak about him. She simply lived her life in silence, holding her past carefully, as if noise itself might shatter it. She never capitalized on his fame, never wrote a memoir, never gave a single interview. Her choice was consistent, steady, deliberate. Disappear and stay disappeared. The collision, when the past finds you. But in 2019, the past found her anyway. Elton published his autobiography, Me. Shortly after, the biopic Rocketman premiered worldwide. Neither portrayed her cruelly. Neither revealed intimate details. But both opened a door she had spent decades closing. Suddenly, her name returned to headlines. Journalists traced her to her home. One even showed up at her door. And the silence she had relied on for survival began to crack. Old emotions resurfaced. Old fears. Old memories she had worked quietly to manage. In her legal filings, she wrote that revisiting the marriage triggered deep anxiety and renewed emotional distress. It wasn't fame she feared. It was the return of a chapter she had never felt strong enough to face again. So she did the one thing she never wanted to do. She stepped back into the public eye, not to speak, but to protect her right not to speak. She filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit, a plea for boundaries. Her claim centered around a non-disclosure agreement signed after the divorce. A promise that neither would publicly discuss the marriage or its breakdown. She argued that certain passages in the memoir and certain scenes in the film violated that promise. Among her concerns, references to private moments during their honeymoon. Implications about her desire for children. Scenes depicting emotional distance that she said distorted reality. But beneath the legal language lay something simpler. She wanted to be left alone. She was not seeking attention. She was seeking quiet. She asked the court to protect her privacy the way she had tried to protect it herself. Elton's team responded respectfully. They said he had spoken about her only with kindness. They said he had intentionally limited references to her. They said the details he shared were already known to the public in broad terms. But they also made something clear. Elton had never intended to cause harm. And when he understood the impact, he chose compassion over confrontation. The resolution: silence, this time mutual. In October 2020, they reached a confidential settlement. No trial. No headlines. No further conflict. Just a joint statement. A commitment to respect Renate's privacy. Acknowledgement that Elton had always treated her with dignity. And a final agreement that neither would speak of each other again. Not an imposed silence. A chosen one. They had entered each other's lives unexpectedly. They had hurt each other unintentionally. And now, decades later, they found closure not through confrontation, but through mutual understanding. Because sometimes the truest form of peace is not noise, not explanation, not retelling, but simply letting the past remain where it belongs. Every story leaves a trace. Some echo loudly in stadiums. Some remain as quiet as a breath. Elton John and Renate Blauel left both. His legacy is written in lights. 300 million records sold. Songs that stitched themselves into generations. Awards, Grammys, an Oscar, a Tony. A knighthood for his contribution to music and charity. And beyond the applause, a deeper imprint. The Elton John AIDS Foundation, a global force for compassion and change. He became more than a performer. He became a symbol of authenticity, of resilience, of speaking truth even when it shakes the life you've built. A husband, a father, a man who learned, slowly and painfully, that a life lived honestly is the only life that truly holds. Her legacy is quieter, but no less meaningful. Renate never sought the spotlight. She never wrote a memoir, never went on television, never tried to reclaim the fame that had brushed her life for only a moment. She chose discretion. She chose dignity. Her silence was not absence, it was intention. In a world eager to turn pain into headlines, she refused to participate. She spoke only once, and only because she needed to protect her peace. Then she returned to the life she had built in the quiet. A life behind hedges, behind new names, behind the soft hum of a world that no longer recognized her. And maybe that is her legacy. A reminder that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it retreats. Sometimes it heals where no one can see. Their stories were never meant to run parallel forever. But for a brief time, they collided. Two people reaching for different forms of safety, hoping love could bridge what truth refused to hide. Because love without honesty fractures. Honesty without kindness wounds. Both need each other the way sound needs silence to have shape. Elton's life became a testimony to the cost of denying oneself, and to the redemption found in finally choosing truth. Renate's life became an example of quiet resilience and the power of holding one's boundaries with grace. Two legacies. One loud, one silent. Both shaped by a marriage that began with hope and ended with understanding. Today, Elton smiles beside his husband and sons, standing in the warmth of a life he once doubted he deserved. And somewhere far from the cameras, perhaps in a small village garden, Renate tends to her own peace, steady, unseen, complete. Two lives no longer connected, yet forever linked by a single question their story asks us all. How honest are we, with the people we love and with ourselves?